I'm Jeff Mays, Metro reporter for the New York Times, filling in for Sam Roberts, who's on vacation. Today I'm sitting down with two of my colleagues to talk about issues New Yorkers are facing in the city. Joining me, New York Times political reporter Dana Rubinstein and New York Times housing reporter Mihir Zaveri. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dana, I want to start with you. We recently wrote a piece about the sort of surprising resignation of Police Commissioner Keechant Sewell. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little about that. That had to be a bit of a shock to the mayor, was it?
Yeah, apparently he understood that she would be leaving at some point, but the actual nature of her resignation, the timing of it, came as a surprise. It was abrupt, and it sort of was a worrying signal to a lot of people in the city about the state of the administration and its ability to retain people who are widely regarded throughout this sort of civic ecosystem for their expertise and competence.
And she was the first woman commissioner of the NYPD as well, also a black woman as well. But there were discussions about whether she had full control of the department. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it can't have been easy to run the police department under a mayor who was a former police captain. But not only was he a present and very involved person in the police department's sort of internal workings, but two of his close allies were also sort of placed around Keechant in a way that she is said to have found troubling. There was someone, there's Phil Banks, who's the deputy mayor for public safety and an unindicted co-conspirator in a corruption case from during the de Blasio era. And then there was a guy named Tim Pearson who worked with the mayor decades ago and is a special advisor to him. And she is said to have felt sort of disempowered.
And Mihiri, Keechant Sewell, the commissioner, wasn't the only surprising resignation, right? The housing commissioner, Jessica Katz, also resigned. Was that an expected move?
I mean, as Dana said, I think it's probably typically expected for a lot of these positions to turn over at some point, but this one was, I wouldn't say expected, but I would also say the tension had been there, sort of brewing since the beginning. I mean, she was named chief housing officer when in prior administrations you might have a deputy mayor for housing, and so there was already some sort of questions of how much power she would have. I mean, so much of what you all were talking about resonates in this side as well, where it's how much authority did she have? There were other people in his circle who seemed to have outsized influence over housing policy, and at times it seemed like she was hamstrung by some of those forces.
What was her impact? I understand she helped design the mayor's housing plan, right?
Yeah, I mean, she wrote most of the housing plan, which was came out in his first year. I think it was around the summertime sometime. It focused a lot on NYCHA, which was somewhat of a departure from the past, and I think was a pretty important focus because I mean, we've talked about it many times, but the public housing system here is in a very difficult state. Also a lot of focus on sort of figuring out where the inefficiencies are in government, how voucher holders can't get into housing, how we can sort of smooth some of these things out. And just another one of our focuses was also sort of trying to, and this may be more of sort of a strategic or political approach, but thinking about how to bring people into government and bring voices into government who maybe wouldn't have been there, so people who have experienced homelessness, formerly homeless people, et cetera.
And Ms. Katz wasn't a deputy mayor, and Dana just talked about how Commissioner Sewell maybe felt undermined in some way. Was that a source of contention with her at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely was. I mean, she hasn't said so publicly, but, a lot of people talk about it, about how, the deputy mayors and other members of his inner circle were sort of involved in housing decisions, or the lack of housing decisions, let's say.
And so I'm wondering, this is the time where people tend to leave the administration. I think the mayor's chief counsel is leaving, his communications director is also leaving. But what do these resignations say about the administration? Is there any concern beyond the normal sort of these are people who are leaving at this particular time, Dana?
There is. I mean, I looked back at the de Blasio administration to sort of tally the major resignations that had happened in his first year and a half in office, and I don't remember the precise number, but it was a small handful. It was very few, and most of the turnover was in his chiefs of staff, I should say. So it creates an appearance of instability, and it's also the case that many of the people who have left are people who are sort of the technocrats in the room rather than the longtime loyalists who might not necessarily have much experience running major organizations. So it creates a feeling of uncertainty, and I guess time will tell whether he's able to recruit people who are similarly skilled and well-regarded to sort of stabilize his administration, or whether it will further this sort of dynamic of him relying on only people that he has known for decades and just deeply, deeply trusts. I mean, right now you look at the Banks family. Philip Banks is the deputy mayor for public safety. His brother, David Banks, is the education chancellor. And David Banks' fiancée, Sheena Wright, is the first deputy mayor. I mean, that is an unusual construct for a mayoral administration.
Was Ms. Katz in that inner circle? Did she feel like she had the sort of authority to get things done?
I mean, I don't think she was in that inner circle. I mean, she had experience, in the Bloomberg administration and also I think the de Blasio administration as well, and wasn't one of these sort of longtime loyalists of Eric's, the mayor's. So she was also, I mean, as Dana said, sort of that technocrat, like sort of very into policy, like how can we pull the right levers to address these problems, working within the political framework, working in a practical framework. So, I would say no.
And housing too, that's been a major issue. I know one of Ms. Katz's concerns was the sort of this 90-day rule where people had to stay in shelter for 90 days before becoming eligible for city rental vouchers. That's been an issue as well with the migrant influx. I wonder, Mihir, maybe you could talk a little bit about how the mayor is handling this influx of migrants. I believe there's been at least 50,000 people still in the city's care at the moment. Yeah,
I mean, it's just to set the table a little bit. I mean, we have a homelessness problem here, like a big one, and part of that, I mean, a huge part of that is because of a housing shortage and a shortage of affordable housing in particular. People just don't have places where they can, find a place to live. So on top of that, if you layer on like a sudden influx of people for, geopolitical reasons, everything that sort of goes into that, I mean, a system that's already stretched, it tests it even further. It tests it to the breaking point. So, I mean, a lot of it has been like trying to find places for people to just be because of, in New York City, as you know, we have the right to shelter. So, typically that means people should have a place over their, a roof over their head, instead of, if you look at San Francisco or somewhere where there's a lot of people sleeping on the streets. But, even that has been tested, as I think you both have written about, where the administration has sought to maybe change the approach to right to shelter, angering a lot of housing advocates. So, I think there is a level of sort of, I wouldn't say unprecedented, but just the problem is so severe now that there's very little, I think, that any public official can just do to solve it immediately. You're talking about the voucher rule, for example. Maybe that would help people move out of shelter quicker. It probably, I mean, it's literally designed to do that, but how quickly will they be able to find housing? That's a big problem here.
Yeah. How is the mayor, do you think, is handling the migrant crisis? I know he's talked about needing federal aid and immigration reform are at the crux of what the city is facing. But what are the reviews for how the city is handling this influx?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, the city is acting in a humane way, which it is required to do by the right to shelter law, by giving housing and services to asylum seekers kind of automatically. But on the other hand, the mayor has been criticized for sort of occasionally veering into quasi-demonization of the migrants, or at least the crisis itself, in that he blames it for all of the things that he cannot do in his administration because it is soaking up so much funding. And that's kind of a pattern with him. I mean, when you look at the housing situation, for example, which, as Mihir noted, is intricately interlinked with the migrant one, he claims that the city's near complete lack of affordable housing development at the moment is completely a product of state inaction. But there are other levers that are also at his disposal, like rezonings, upzonings, better staffing the HPD so that these applications for affordable housing development subsidies can move quickly. So, I'd say the reviews are mixed.
Wow. Here, there was a package of legislation that the mayor vetoed recently, a lot of it having to do with shelter and housing issues. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And will that affect the influx of migrants we're seeing?
I mean, I think the influx is it's not something that's controlled locally, right? I mean, this is like the product of just international forces and, even national forces, like you have states, sending migrants to New York or whatever to sort of spread the problem around, or however they want to phrase it. But so the package that you're referencing, I mean, there was the 90-day rule, which just to, I guess, elaborate a little bit, means typically you have to stay in a shelter for 90 days before you're eligible for City FEP's voucher, which is the city's voucher. So there's that. Another bill would have, and this was the more contentious one, basically made anyone eligible for a City FEP's voucher if they received a rent demand letter from their landlord. So the way that the administrations and the mayor was framing it, I mean, this means anyone who owes rent will automatically be eligible for a City FEP's voucher, and that'll put a huge drain on the city's resources because that would just open it up to many, many, many people. I could sort of see that concern from a fiscal perspective. It's been echoed by other fiscal watchdogs like the Citizens Budget Commission, which is an independent nonprofit. However, at the same time, I mean, it didn't seem like he wanted to engage on this issue, which the city council, which, as you've written about, is sort of more progressive and more, thinking about how to address these problems in different ways, is sort of been itching for.
Do we get a sense of how the mayor's doing? I mean, the migrant crisis is a huge crisis. Mihir has talked about some of the housing challenges the city's facing. The budget is about to be approved. Is there an overall sense, 18 months in, of how Mayor Adams is doing?
It's tough to say. It is early yet. The only thing we can really do is compare his first 18 months to the first 18 months of prior administrations. I mean, de Blasio, his biggest achievement during his 8 years in office was really universal pre-kindergarten, which happened during his first year. Bloomberg inherited New York City that had just, endured September 11th. So he had and he was credited with helping New York sort of revive itself. So, Adams has inherited a challenging environment. There's no question about that. I think it remains to be seen what he's going to do proactively. I will say, the thing he ran on crime numbers have begun to ebb. They're also ebbing nationally. But, as he ran on that issue, it is fair to give him some credit for that.
Great. We're taking a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion about the latest news happening in New York City. We're back, and I'm talking with my colleagues Dana Rubinstein and Mihir Zaveri. Mihir, the city announced a plan recently to tear down 2 public housing complexes and a $1.5 billion plan and build new housing. I believe it's going to be a mix of market rate and low income housing. Has that ever been done before?
It's never been done before, at least in New York City. So like you said, the overall plan is the Fulton houses and the Elliott Chelsea houses in Manhattan, both in the Chelsea area. An area that's seen a lot of development in recent years. You have the High Line, you have Hudson Yards. It's been one of the hot areas. And these 2 complexes, like many complexes in the public housing system, have a lot of issues. Similar issues: broken elevators, plumbing, crumbling infrastructure. You hear about these unfortunately every day, and so the city and NYCHA, which runs the public housing system, has been looking for a way out of this problem. The last estimate is that it's about a $40 billion problem. That's based on an assessment that was done in, I think, 2017 at this point. There's a thought that there's a new assessment coming out soon and that the numbers are going to be much, much greater across the system. Anyhow, so that sort of sets the table for this. So they're looking for a way to do this. The de Blasio administration, before the Adams administration, had sort of dipped their toe in kind of going forward in this direction. So they thought maybe demolishing a couple of the buildings, and that would be one way to sort of, again, find a way forward. residents and activists and politicians thought, hey, like that's not going to happen, because as much as there are problems in the public housing system, it's sort of a cherished thing for a lot of people. I mean, it's the only truly affordable housing stock in New York City. I mean, everything's getting so much more expensive. That's what public housing stands for. So people don't want to leave. Demolishing it is always a scary prospect. So, yeah, I mean that's so now the plan is, the first when the De Blasio administration tried to do it, they got essentially back down, and this time they tried a different approach. The city says more engagement, sort of letting residents a little bit deeper into like what the problems are, and the way it's being framed is that the residents sort of endorsed this new plan, and one of the key reasons it's been endorsed is because they're going to build the new buildings first. So you're not just going to get displaced for most people. They're going to see the new building, you're going to be able to move into the new building, then they're going to demolish the older building.
That's what I was going to ask. That seems like a big impediment to doing this, is that people are ensured that they will come back to the affordable housing. Dana, how important is NYCHA to the city? And has Mayor Adams really focused much on public housing in his first 18 months?
Well, I mean, to Mihir's point, it is the only sizable, workforce housing in New York City. It's home to some 400,000 people, and it's deeply, deeply dilapidated. And, there's long been this question of at what point will it no longer make economic sense to keep repairing this stuff rather than just tearing it down and building it anew. And, I mean, that's finally coming to a head here. Eric, he, as Mihir noted, he included NYCHA in his overall housing plan, which is sort of a vision rather than all that, it doesn't seem like all that actionable of a document at this point in time, but that was novel and symbolically important. He clearly identifies, many of the people who live in NYCHA as his base or part of his base. And this does seem like a big sort of step forward, or at least a test case to see if this whole idea can work. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, Mihir, is this a blueprint for repairing all of NYCHA? As Dana said, 400,000 people, but we know that's actually a low estimate. We believe there are many more hundreds of thousands living there. But is this a blueprint for the rest of public housing? Yeah,
I mean, so that is the city and NYCHA's hope, that once they do this, other people will see, hey, like maybe this is an option for us in a development in Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens. I would also just say, I mean, one of the key features of this plan is this overall shift that's happening, sort of not in the not at front and center as perhaps other housing issues, but NYCHA has traditionally been funded by the federal government, has been sort of publicly owned, operated for many, many decades. That's changing. A lot of these developments are being shifted over to private management. This is all part of a Obama-era program that allows the agency to tap into more money to do repairs. But it's kind of a big moment because it's, we're admitting that the public cannot maintain and operate these buildings, and that we need private companies to come in and help. And for people who live in public housing, for people who care about, the importance of public housing, it's hard to, it's a hard pill to swallow. It's to be determined, where this goes in the future, of course. I mean, this is a big change. Who knows what changes will come. So anyway, the rebuild here will be done by private developers. And as you mentioned, that means market rate, mixed income housing also on the property. These campuses have long been eyed as possible development sites, and, have long been resisted because of, it's probably one of the more valuable things that NYCHA has at this point is the land. So yes, I think to answer your question, it's definitely hope that this is a blueprint. I've spoken to some people who at different developments who are eager to maybe have it at their development as well. But we'll see. I mean, the final part I'll mention is that this administration is at least trying to frame this in a way where it's going to be the resident's choice, so that if you are at a certain development, you can choose between staying in the same facilities, you can choose between maybe rebuilding, maybe having a private company come in and do some repairs. That's the general thought.
Let's just stay on housing for a second. Sure. I know you recently wrote a story about the city's affordable housing lottery, and I believe there was a lawsuit that was challenging the way the city administered the lottery, saying that it fueled segregation actually in New York City.
Yeah.
We already know New York City is one of the most segregated cities in America. Could you tell me a little bit about that suit and where's it at this point?
Yeah, so there is a long-standing practice in affordable housing in New York City, and by affordable housing, I mean housing that's subsidized by the city in some fashion through some city programs. That's how the rents can be lowered. That's how it can be affordable to people of lower incomes. So in these types of projects, typically half of the units in housing in one of these developments are reserved for people living in the community district surrounding that development. So, you know, New York City's divided into 59 or so community districts, right? And they all sort of geographically roughly correspond to neighborhood type areas. And so basically, if you live in the area surrounding the development, you have a better shot at getting into that affordable housing development. Nobody disputes that. What the city does dispute is that this is fueling segregation, because they say, so the plaintiffs in the lawsuit will say that because you're just essentially guaranteeing people around a development to have a better shot, you know, people are going to stay in their area and they're not going to be able to move around as much, and that's going to be, you know, that's going to fuel segregation. The city says, well, overall, affordable housing integrates the city. So, you know, we don't think that this is a problem, and we also need this type of policy to win over the local community, because the local community can be one of the biggest obstacles to building new housing.
Just staying on housing too, the Rent Guidelines Board also made a decision recently on increasing 1- and 2-year leases. Tell me about that. Were advocates happy with those changes?
It depends which advocates you ask. So, you know, the Rent Guidelines Board, this is a theater we do every year where they come together and they decide how much the rents or rent stabilized homes are going up. Rent stabilized apartments are about half of the entire rental stock in New York City. I mean, it's a huge number of apartments. They're not all low rent. Some are higher, newer buildings that are rent stabilized because they got tax breaks. And so, yeah, I mean, there's always this theater where advocates for tenants want the rent to be frozen or rolled back. And advocates for landlords want the rents to go up as high as possible, so they have increased costs. So two sides always come together. No one's happy in the end, at least publicly, and you know, they usually meet somewhere in the middle.
Dana, the city and the state are always looking for revenue, and there is a proposal to build casinos in New York City. Larry Silverstein recently announced plans to jump into the mix. I think Jay-Z is involved in one proposal, right?
Sure.
There's a plan to put a casino out in Coney Island, where I grew up, which, you know, I'm wondering what you think about that. What's happening with these casino proposals, and are we going to see a casino like in Times Square or on the boardwalk in Coney Island anytime soon?
Anytime soon? You know, everything takes forever in New York, but the state is allowing up to 3 casinos, full-scale casinos, in the New York City region. And there's, my last count was at least 10, roughly 10 proposals right now. And many of the proposals are from major developers, including related companies, which developed Hudson Yards or is developing Hudson Yards. SL Green, the largest commercial landlord in New York City, which, as you noted, is partnering with Jay-Z. The Coney Island one, Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets. So yeah, I mean, we are likely to get up to 3, maybe even 3. How the state is going to choose between these various proposals will be interesting, but there will be a lot of local input in order for a proposal to proceed to the state sort of decision-making apparatus. They have to get 2/3 support from a committee made up of local political representatives. I will say that the mayor wants as many casinos as possible in New York City, and the governor wants these casinos because she's relying on their revenue to, among other things, support the MTA, which is facing, yet again, another existential crisis because of the decline of commuting in the aftermath of the pandemic. So yeah, we will be getting casinos in New York City. I have no idea how they will choose which ones. The Coney Island one is an interesting one that appeals to many people, but other people find very objectionable. And I think that sort of give and take or duality of opinions attends every single one of these proposals, because the truth is casinos are a very divisive issue.
Yeah, what is the record on casinos? You know, I look at places like Atlantic City. Do they actually bring in the sort of revenue that the governor and the mayor would like to see?
It depends on the location. There's obviously a cannibalization sort of effect that happens when a new casino comes in. There are not, there's like a somewhat static supply of people who go to casinos and gamble. I will say New York City, and Manhattan in particular, is considered like the last great untapped gambling market in the country, and one of the last great sort of ones with the greatest potential in the world. I think there's no question that a Manhattan casino would bring in a ton of revenue.
Speaking of revenue, congestion pricing.
Yeah.
That plan was just improved. Again, the goal is to bring in revenue to increase public transportation. Tell me about that. Is that something that people are happy about, that want to see? Is it set? When will it start?
This is yet again another very divisive revenue generation mechanism. I think they expect it to start next year at some point, now that the approvals have gone through. New Jersey hates it. The governor there, Phil Murphy, is campaigning against it, as are many electeds. Transportation advocates like it. Folks who care about, funding the MTA and, encouraging people to use mass transit rather than using gas-powered vehicles to get around New York City like it a lot. But it's definitely controversial, and, like anything in New York, these changes just are lightning rod issues.
Great. Congestion pricing?
I have pretty much exclusively taken public transportation in New York City, and it seems to be not in great shape. So, whatever will fix that, I'm for.
And it is. I mean, with the MTA, it's very reliant on its fare box revenue, and this, if people want to continue having regular subway and bus service and repairs to subways and buses, and the revenue does have to come from somewhere.
Thank you. That's all we have time for today's show. Special thanks to New York Times Metro reporters Dana Rubinstein and Mihir Zaveri for joining me. I'm Jeff Mays, filling in for Sam Roberts for CUNY TV.